Hey, hey, hey. Hello, animal allies. What's up? What's good? What's new? What's going on? What's shaking? So glad to have you joining us tonight. I'm very excited to be joined by David, the 40-year-old vegan, for another AAM Activist Chat Live. Before we start our program, my name is Michelle Granberg. I'm a mentor and team member with Animal Activism Mentorship. For those of you who are new to AAM, AAM is a multinational program designed to support and empower activists to reach their full potential and equip them with the tools, community, and resources they need to boldly participate in our global animal liberation movement. Founded in 2020, AAM offers a 3-month mentorship program which pairs experienced activists with aspiring activists. You can apply today to become a mentor or a mentee through our website. And we're so much more than a mentorship program. We offer free educational online live streams and trainings like this one. We have a podcast called the Animal Liberation Hour, and we host large-scale in-person activism events around the country. All right, so now with that being said, it is my distinct pleasure to bring on David, also known as the 40-year-old vegan. He is an ex-slaughterhouse inspector and current powerful animal rights activist. David will be taking your questions shortly, but hold on to them for now, okay? Hey, David, what's up and welcome.
Hey, Michelle, thanks so much for having me on. Just want to say, AAM, thank you so much for all you do, from the mentorship to having the campaigns, the convergence campaigns. I was lucky enough to go to one. I actually still have a bracelet from the time I went out. So I really encourage anybody to join on AAM. It's such a terrific, terrific organization.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. There's so many wonderful grassroots groups out there right now, and it's good to just say we all try to work together. And we have to, and we absolutely have to for the animals. So we have you here today because you have a really unique story. You have a really unique perspective on animal rights and animal welfare and animal liberation, as an ex-slaughterhouse inspector. So, feel free to start a little bit, not at the beginning, but somewhere around the beginning for yourself. Your family was in and is still in animal ag and the slaughter industry. So tell us about how you came to it. Tell us your story and how it began, how long you worked there, when you stopped working there, a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you everyone else for joining tonight. I really appreciate it. Obviously, a tough topic for me to bring up and talk about, but the way I look at it as the last vigil I was at, looking at the animals in the eyes and seeing them and what they go through. So it's not that tough speaking about my experience, considering what they go through is tragic. And I think we need to speak up more about these types of things. So for me, yes, I started when I was about 20 years old working in a place called Maple Lodge Farms, a slaughterhouse that killed, I think they kill right now 500,000 a day, uh, 280 birds per minute, 3 birds per second is the current from what the last I heard. So I followed my grandparents, my mom, my aunt, my uncle. They all worked in the industry, and I've talked about this in the past. Sort of followed suit, followed their path. And my grandfather instilled these values on me about working for the government, having a pension, all these perks to being a government worker. And I think the way it was put to me was somebody's got to do it. So with the intention of trying to do the best job I could, I went inside and saw what happened in these places. I reflect back to the first time, and I think I mentioned it in past streams where, you walk into this place and the smell just hits you right away. And it kind of permeates in your skin, and you kind of think, what am I doing here? And I saw these poor chickens, a little bit of a graphic warning here. if you can't listen, but chickens' heads frozen to crates and hearing this slamming noise of these crates going down. And I often, when I talk to people about these experiences, former workers, I ask them about, or people that currently work in it who kill, about their first time. And almost everyone I've talked to has vividly remembered their first time. And so I do. So that's why I started with talking about it. So yeah, I again with the intention, with the welfarist mindset, which I don't have now, but um, seeing that these birds were put in the most welfare type of situation where crates were being put down rather than thrown down. That stunning methods were appropriate, and then also basically the job was to make sure that, maintenance and temperature controls and all these things were, uh, adhered to as an inspector. So along the lines, I got sick, very sick working in these places, uh, almost to the point where I lost my life. At some point, I couldn't physically work in these places, so I went out into something called processing. So I would go to these processing facilities and inspect their manual procedures, make sure they're doing their jobs, so to say. And yeah, I eventually ended up culminating, almost 15 years working in the agency, and I vividly remember my last few months there. I was working in a place called Animal Health, and I saw things that um, still haunt me to this day. And I suffered trauma because of those things. And I think when workers work in these places, they bury these things. It's kind of the only way you could do these jobs is to shut yourself off, maybe turn to alcohol and drugs, and just not be who you once were. And so seeing these the job entailed me looking through videos, pictures of all these so-called animal abuses happening within the confines of the law. And my job was simply just to look at them, make sure that all the information was there, and then it was put on a desk for others to decide whether or not these cases were going to court. And so what stuck with me as well is the fact that there was filing cabinets full of these cases, within this welfarist mindset that were never brought to court, never even considered gone to court. And even if they did, which I only had been to court two times in my entire career, um, the consequences are just part of business. So like a multi-millionaire dollar company would receive a fine of maybe a couple $1,000. So that wouldn't do much to deter them to change. And so I saw that it affected me greatly. I had a partner at the time who saw I was struggling mentally. I wanted to change and I just didn't know how. I've been, conditioned to say that I have to eat animals my entire life, and that I'd somehow be missing something if I did. And not knowing much about nutrition or not knowing much about even the word vegan. I decided I just didn't want to be a part of this anymore. And um, my partner at the time suggested I try vegetarian and vegan. And so that's sort of how, to make a long story short, how I eventually started to make that connection.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I'm trying to remember the timeline that you're saying here. You actually started to make the transition while you were still working there.
Yeah, so around 2013 is when I started to make the connection. 2014, like I didn't know what the connection was or the philosophy of veganism or anything like that. I just knew I didn't want to be part of that, and some of that was me not working directly on a slaughterhouse kill floor. And some of that was just obviously I felt like there was some, maybe benefits health-wise. So I started to do some research. I watched a documentary called Forks Over Knives. I can't remember some of the other ones, but I started to learn that, maybe there's a way I can move away from that. So I worked for about 15 years in animal agriculture. And so, yeah, I took a lot from that, obviously, that I'm sitting here today. But yeah, it was, uh, quite an experience with inside of working in there. And then, I'm still decompressing all the things that I witnessed. And obviously, I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but I've been diagnosed with the CPTSD and bipolar disorder, and so. I know that's all as a result of what I've seen in these places. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being bold enough. And I know, of course, we think about the animals and like you say, there's no comparison to what they're going through, but our trauma, secondary trauma from witnessing that you couldn't have gotten any closer to it. And for that length of time, it's hard to fathom psychologically how that changes you. And you talked about the trauma because you can't unsee it. Um, I know it felt normalized at the time for you. You were
Yeah.
surrounded by it. I mean, there were nobody asked questions and, and, and in the world, nobody thinks about folks who work in slaughterhouses and it's so hidden and it's so invisible. But there is some statistics out there, and I forget but it comes up in outreach, to bring compassion for slaughterhouse folks who work in slaughterhouses because the mental health consequences and the well-being consequences, and often they are stuck in the system, and they have PTSD and depression and anxiety. And isn't it true as well that sometimes it translates into domestic abuse, or even
Absolutely.
worse, even more pathology, like sociopathic uh, tendencies? And we know that there's one of the traits of someone who is diagnosed with that is that they hurt animals at a young age. And, can you say a little bit more about that? As hard as this is,
Yeah.
how did it translate for you outside of work when was it hard for you to leave work at work, of course, and what did you witness with the workers and how it chipped away at them?
Yeah. So I vividly remember bringing to one of the inspectors' attention about the birds that were frozen to the crate, and what he said to me is, "It's okay. It's better off that they die this way. They just go to sleep," something like that. And I was the youngest inspector by far. Everybody was, I think the closest guy in age was like 10 years my senior. And so right from then, and then also the fact that my grandfather helped me get the job, I didn't have a voice. I felt like, I'm doing what I can, and I just got to listen and suck it up and bury it. And I think that's a common thing is you have to bury it. You have to take yourself, like it's like you're a third party. You're kind of watching yourself outside of yourself. And it's common in people that do work in these places that they suffer PTSD, drug, alcohol abuse, workplace injuries, and domestic violence, like really graphic type violence, even neighborhoods. Dr. Amy Fitzgerald, working out of the University of Windsor, goes right into some of the experiences that communities, even if you're not working in these neighborhoods, how the spikes in violent crimes go up. And yeah, so it's obviously systemic. And so I'm not to say that there aren't people that go into this line of work just because they enjoy it, because there definitely are. You can almost spot them a mile away. So yeah, I've seen all sides of it. I think I've seen people that were like, you know, scary to be around. I remember being in a cow slaughterhouse, and seeing a man with a machete and just the look in his eyes and him laughing about what he was doing. And, like you could see he got a thrill out of it. And it's just, it's bizarre that you would think that somebody could have thrill out of it, but the data shows that you move away from empathy, you're likely to move into psychopathy. And so yeah, and I also seen a worker, throw a chicken, and because they got scratched by the chicken. And I remember like yelling at, like, you're not supposed to yell at somebody, but I yelled at him, and he got down on his hands and knees and begged me not to say anything because he was worried he was going to get deported. And so, you're stuck in a moment there. You're stuck, do I say something and this worker gets deported? And, do you say something about all the things you saw? And you do. You do certainly say something, but you don't get you don't get any help. You're just annoyance to, the senior staff or the managers or people up the chain because they don't want to be held accountable. I mean, I remember one instance where I saw these trucks coming in, and every single bird was bruised. Every single bird. We're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of birds were bruised. And you know that somebody, and part of my language, kicked the shit out of these birds. And maybe more than one. And these birds were already frail to begin with. And you try to bring this up to management, through your supervisor, the chain of command, so to say, and nobody's doing anything about it. And you try to go over their head and you get reprimanded, and these things are common. And like then you got to worry about your job and whether or not you're going to be employed and whether or not you can work within the system to try to change it. But obviously there's no right way to do this. They talk about things like humane. The only reason that the term humane came up is for people to feel better about themselves. There's no humane way to captive bolt gun somebody. There's no humane way to electrocute their head or put them in a gas chamber. That's just so workers are a little bit safer because animals are going to be trying to get away. I mean, it's absurd, this whole entire industry. And then imagine, you're the worker that comes in, or the immigrant that comes in, and you have to sign a contract. And the job is you're working on a kill floor. And if you don't work on that kill floor, well, see you later. Go back to your own country. And imagine having to kill all day, every day. It's obviously going to turn good people into a little bit different, right? And so these workers, a lot of them don't have the access to like healthcare, or some psychiatrists and stuff like that. Like I had the opportunity to sit down with a therapist, and I've been able to kind of maybe not right the ship as far as my head mentally, because I'll never have that. I suffer flashbacks every day, all the time. Um, and nobody should ever have to do that. But these workers, they've got really nothing going for them. Their injuries are often underreported. Like it's absurd. It's absurd that we live in a system that, even if they don't care for animals, which I believe most people do, they just, they're doubling down. It's cognitive dissonance. But to have not even empathy for people working in these positions. And I often bring it up in outreach. I often, when I talk to people in the streets, they're like, I never thought of it that way. And so maybe it's a line of questioning that we could use for advocacy. So, and I'll stop going on my tangent here. It's just
No, I
it's very
want.
frustrating.
It's very frustrating. I do want to talk more about that because that was another, maybe in a bit, another question I have.
Sure.
Should we, do you lead with that, telling people that you worked in the slaughterhouse when you're doing outreach, and how the average activist can be more effective, and telling the animal stories and talking about what's really going on behind closed doors. But you're making me think, in addition to immigrants and people from marginalized communities who are working in slaughterhouses, I saw in the movie Christspiracy, there was a scene at a slaughterhouse where it's also prisoners,
Hmm.
who are taken out temporarily out of the prison to, or maybe it's just after when they're on parole, I'm not sure, but I mean, they're already convicted murderers. It's almost like a perfect fit in a horrible dystopian, world way, they're working, they're still killing for a living. Now the killing is authorized and sanctioned and normalized killing, and they're doing that again for a living. And the cause and effect back and forth between that, how that's making them worse, and how also who else are they going to get to do these kinds of intense and extreme jobs. And what the prisoner said in the documentary was, I have no choice. I can't speak up. I can't say anything. I can't complain. I have to do the job. Can you imagine, like you're saying, the only way through it is to compartmentalize your feelings, but that doesn't really work. That itself catches up to you, and that's really what PTSD is. It's the buildup of unprocessed emotions, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
very, very upsetting. And then, so what's the main sort of reason, you as an inspector, it was your job to report when these businesses or the individuals were out of compliance, right? Going against the rules. And you would do that nine times out of 10, not even every time. And I would bet that it felt really futile after doing it for years and nothing would happen. But why was there no follow-up or prosecution? Is because it's just another day
Yeah,
doing
I
business. Was money just the bottom line, or were there cahoots between the government and these businesses?
well, yeah, I mean, if you look at I mean, we're going to get into it a bit later, but obviously like when there's no accountability being taken, you're going to lose your momentum. And so like the situation with all the birds that were heavily bruised, I brought this to the attention of the veterinarian in charge, and they just, they sat there. And this is why I went over their head. And, eventually, maybe a manager saw that. I emailed a whole chain of a bunch of people, and you're not allowed to do that, but I did. I mean, just to get some voice to the situation. But as an inspector, your job just goes right up to supervisor. Supervisor and the veterinarian and the vet in charge, they decide what's going to go up further. And if it's something that's going to put them out, if it's something that's going to, um, you know, make them have to get off their ass and do something, then, that's something they got to reconcile with. But even if they don't see it go to a prosecution level, like I don't know. I didn't see the onus on anyone in this industry. I honestly think there's a saying actually even brought up by the inspectors. So I worked for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. It's called can't find inspectors anywhere. And so that was a term used. And so oftentimes there's a blind eye turn. Oftentimes there was a place I went to and there wasn't even paperwork at some of these places. And so what are you supposed to do in that term? And then when you do speak out, I mean, I can't really disclose why entirely that my career ended with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. But you can imagine why. You can read in between the lines. And so if you're there to speak up and speak out on behalf for years and years and years, there's no incentive there. And then back to the workers, you're absolutely spot on. There's there's no out. There's no out. And they had a prisoner, or sorry, a prison here, one of the first slaughterhouses I went to. And you could still see the prison fences around. It's no longer, but still, I mean, um, you can't backfill these jobs enough because people just don't want to work in them. And it's not the general population. It's not university or college educated people. These are minorities. These are marginalized groups that are working in these places and suffering the consequences of this systemic, ridiculous industry.
So do you worry at all about repercussions talking about this?
No, not
Not.
anymore.
Okay, good.
I did at first, maybe a little bit. I was maybe worried about my safety at times. I did. I just flashed back to a time I got somebody sent me a text message with a picture with a bunch of inspectors, and they were all just kind of giving me a dirty look and with this picture when they found out I was speaking out. So yeah, at first I worried about my safety, and I think, to be relatable to everyone, I think there's two stages of this cognitive dissonance that we have. There's one that, we finally realized that holy shit, we don't have to eat animals. Oh my God, what a novel idea. And then the second part is speaking up. I think we get caught in these stages, and I think that second part is a little more difficult for many. If you look at, obviously, sometimes we call them potluck vegans. And it's not to say that they're not trying or some aren't, and I don't want to discourage anybody. But yeah, obviously, if we had more vegans speaking out and not getting stuck in that second stage, because like imagine if that's your family member, imagine it's your dog, imagine, it's someone you care about, whether it's a worker or whether it's a non-human animal, like, or like, why wouldn't you go and um take 2 hours, take 2 hours a month, and I think, I was kind of trying to figure out a way to try to inspire people by coming on this stream, was to say, look, one day out of the whole year, take that one day, divide that up into 2 hours a month. Please get out, do something.
Yeah, we're gonna start in a minute, I think, talking, about activism, connecting the dots between, your prior life and your current life in terms of activism. Now, we met recently at a vigil in Newark, New Jersey that you came to. Um, and shout out to Tears for Change. Um, and can you say what's the biggest difference, if you know, between Canadian and the US slaughter industry? Anything that you've noticed or you noticed that day, or really no big differences?
I think, um, I don't know if it's fortunate or not fortunate. It's probably fortunate that we had a lot more time to spend with the animals on that day. In Canada, it's a lot more difficult to spend time around trucks. So a lot of the slaughterhouses here have like a driveway where they'll just drive in, and there's no time to really see the animals. And even when we do have the opportunity, usually it's on a street, and drivers will time traffic lights so that they don't have to stop, so we don't have time to bear witness. So yeah, I think the difference is with that slaughterhouse particularly is we had a lot of time with the animals.
So for you, you have a uniquely different experience than any of the rest of us who attend vigils and bear witness, because we don't get any further. We've never gone any further than the trucks. Even though we can get close to the outside of the slaughterhouse, we cannot get inside or really even see inside. So for you, it's a different experience being behind closed doors of the industry. Like what goes on in your mind when you're at a vigil? Are you having flashbacks? Or are you comparing, contrasting? Like what's that like?
Yeah, I think it depends on the day. I go to vigils often. So my therapist said they recommended this is maybe some part of therapy on what I should do. So some days I'll just hold a sign and I'll be off in the distance. I'll have headphones in and I'll be playing like classical music or something that's light. And other days I'll be right in there with a camera trying to get the best footage possible. But yeah, like obviously, it does trigger flashbacks. Often I'm with the pigs and at Fearman Slaughterhouse and in Burlington, Ontario. And yeah, so I obviously get flashbacks to when I saw them killed, actually just not too far from me here at another slaughterhouse, a larger slaughterhouse, if you can believe that. I get flashbacks to the guys prodding the pigs, and you know, them just going into a gas chamber screaming for their lives and just flop on the floor as if they were dead after this gas chamber experience. And then, I won't get into more graphic details on what goes on after that, but that's what I see. Um, I look in their eyes at a vigil, and then that's what I see. I see them, going through that final experience after the gas chamber. And yeah, it's tragic. It's horrific. It's awful to see. And what I would say to anybody out there that's not experienced what I have, I don't recommend they do, obviously, except maybe people that are saying they love to kill animals or they're good with it, they're okay with it, then go experience a slaughterhouse and see if that resonates with you. But everything you see, every video you've witnessed, those are real moments. And we all know that, I think, as activists. But if you're new or you haven't been aware, I don't have to have worked in there or be part of the system or be an inspector, whatever, for all of us to know exactly what takes place there. And the other thing is like the animals know. They sense it. You can tell, right? Maybe that's one thing that people aren't aware of. Like their senses kick in right before they're going, and they can smell it. They have better senses than we do. So yeah, those are some of the things that obviously flash back in my mind. Just having a bunch of flashbacks right now.
Yeah. Yeah, this is heavy. I mean, this is really heavy, and we acknowledge that. And I should have said at the beginning, trigger alert, but I think you said that. Will say it's worth saying again for folks for whom this brings a lot up. But let's talk about Regan Russell and then your activism. We want to get to some calls for action and what we can do and how we can make a difference that activists really do. And you met Regan Russell, and maybe you could say a bit about, in case there's a couple of people who don't know her story. She was murdered by a slaughterhouse truck driver, and you were there that day, but I know you did not witness it. But is there anything you want to share about Regan or what you recall of that day, that scary, shocking, sad day that sent a ripple effect throughout our vegan activist community worldwide? And we are holding her friends and family right now, in our heart. I saw a video of her parents speaking on the anniversary that was a couple of months ago. I think it's 5 years, but I could be wrong about that, something like that. And
Yeah.
and they were talking so boldly and so emotionally, but just proud of her, so proud of her. So what would you like folks to know about Regan?
Yeah, how could you not be so proud of her? So if yeah, it was 2020, January 19th, or sorry, June 19th. Um, so about Regan, so she was an advocate for over 40 years. I didn't know her too well, and a lot of people really didn't know much about um like within the newer activist community, the older activist community very well knew Regan. She was on the front lines of so many wonderful actions, Marineland. There's dogs, there's so many of them. So she was a teacher, a model. She did every type of activism you could ever think of, and there's going to be actually a documentary coming out,
Mm,
I think very soon, hopefully within the next few months. And it's going to talk about her life specifically, not just the activism part, but
mm,
obviously part of that because it was such a big part of her life. So yeah, the opportunity to meet her, I was at a few events with her. And the one thing I remember about Regan is her laugh. I've been introduced to her and I said how long I've been vegan and how long I've been an activist, which wasn't as long. Obviously, she said she had been an activist for over 40 years, and I'm like, oh my God, that's longer than I've been alive. And she just started laughing and laughing. And yeah, and about that day, I mean, I was mostly going to as many vigils as possible, and that day, I think about it often. What if I went, if things would have changed? And I think everybody can think that way. But yeah, I just remember I was sitting at home. I'm like, I'm not going to go this time. And I looked over at my phone, and it wasn't uncommon to get a bunch of messages in our chats because we had Signal and we had Messenger and all these chats. But all of a sudden, I look and all these messages are coming in both, and I really couldn't make out what was being said. Activists hurt, activists killed, something like that. And I just remember I just got up and I got in my car and I drove. And I still get the chills over it. And so showed up and started to put the pieces together, what took place. And yeah, we ended up at the owner of the Slaughterhouse's house that evening, demanding him at least say something, which he never did. He never, not once has he publicly apologized. And there's a lot of nuance to all of this, considering that Andrew Blake, the guy who ran her over, um, he got off with I think a $2,000 fine and a Highway Traffic Act charge, which doesn't really go on your criminal record, and unbelievable how this case was treated from day one all the way, even up until now. Last year, I think it was in October, something like that, the Toronto Star came out with a 911 call that Andrew Blake, the driver from Brussels Transport, had called. And I just asked anybody to go listen to that. I mean, it's the Toronto Sun. It's on YouTube and it's 5 minutes long. You listen to what he says. We've been bearing witness for I don't know how many years, since 2013, 14, something like that. This company coming to Fearman Slaughterhouse all the time, every day, all the time, and we're there sometimes 3 times a week. So clearly everyone's aware of what's going on, but what isn't talked about is this Ag-Gag bill, Bill 156, Security and Trespass Act, which came into place the day before Regan was killed. And so this gag law was to prevent activists from bearing witness, and having an enclosure zone where people wouldn't be allowed to go and bear witness, as well as stopping whistleblowing, whether you're a farm worker or whether you're an activist, essentially going against our fundamental rights and freedoms here. I know it's the Constitution in the States, but it's essentially the same. So freedom of expression. So these things were shoved through the legislature. And a story about that is the critic, the opposite of the agriculture minister, the person who's supposed to be fighting against what the government in power is doing, is his nephew. And so this gag law got shoved through. This is something that Regan was really fighting, we all were fighting against. And so the drivers knew this. The drivers were laughing at us. They were driving up and saying, "You're not going to be able to do this anymore. Ha ha ha." And they started to become more aggressive. And as far as Mark Russell's concerned and the family, I feel like there's not a lot I can say on certain topics, but there's going to be more that comes out. And I think eventually justice does prevail at some point, and hopefully with some stuff that does come out, I really hope that at the very least, uh, charges are laid and charges are fulfilled. And this is not just one, Regan is one person, but this is all of us. Regan was all of us, and such a powerhouse, and out there days in the wintertime when nobody was out there, such an incredible, incredible person.
Mm, absolutely. So we want to take away from that continuing in her name. But forgive me if I haven't followed this closely enough. Is the Ag-Gag laws, are they the law of the land in Canada currently still?
So last year, or was it last year? I'm vague on the dates, but uh, animal justice. So they fight laws, and they fight for animal advocacy here in Canada. Incredible organization. If you don't know them, they do the Animal Justice Academy. I highly recommend you go join. Uh, wonderful people working in there. So they went and they fought this Ag-Gag law along with, I believe, Mark's Regan Russell Foundation and Louise Jorgensen and a few others. And so we were contending against this law for a long time, obviously. Scholars and all of that were saying this goes against our fundamental rights. And so Animal Justice went in and they had the bill repealed. Um, Certain parts of the bill was still allowed to stay. So basically, we can't stop trucks. We can't give water, which is ridiculous. But the rest of the whistleblowing stuff like that, we are allowed to do. Although there's a federal bill now in place, Bill C-275, I believe it is, which is trying to take the place of Ag-Gag Bill 156. And I forgot to mention with Ag-Gag Bill 156, the first offense would be a $15,000 fine. So if I saw a chicken or an animal in distress on a farm, and I went to help that chicken or whatever animal, I could be charged $15,000. So this new bill that's coming into place is looking to maximize these fines. They're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, $200,000, I think, for a first offense, and $500,000 for any organization associated with. So clearly, an overstep by the government, trying to take away our fundamental freedoms. What do you got to hide? I mean, it's obvious what they have to hide, but for some of us it is, but most of the public doesn't know what's going on behind these closed doors.
Oh, that sounds awful. Just such a miscarriage of justice. As usual, the animals, they're non-things. We don't want to, we don't consider them. They're just, we just discard them, so if anybody, that we're getting comments in the chat through YouTube wants to put in the information about Animal Justice Academy, you're welcome to share that. If you have more thoughts about Regan Russell, feel free to share those in the chat as well. We're going to open it up for questions momentarily. But so David, you do a lot of activism. You're very active. Um, and so how often, or is it every time you talk to someone on the street, in outreach or in any, do you find yourself leading with your story, or bringing it up at some point? And how powerful is it? And what general or even a specific memory of a specific response have you gotten when we're talking like you get someone so totally, it's so off their radar screen, any of this, and maybe you talk to them like, is it shock? Is it numbness? Is it cognitive dissonance? Or do they double down on their beliefs?
Yeah, I love this question, and it's something I really want. Like I've been trying to think of how we can use it in our advocacy. So oftentimes the footage speaks for itself, and oftentimes the arguments center around a humane way or culture, tradition, stuff like that. Just the basic arguments. And most of the time, I in those situations, if I feel like I can get them to look at animals as persons and that they deserve rights just like cats and dogs. Um, Most of the time, I don't even need to bring that up. Obviously, there's going to be the times where people start to say, well, I don't care. I don't care. They eat dogs in other countries. And, when you ask them if they would eat dogs, they say they would, but, they probably wouldn't. So at a point when I see they're not connecting with the animals, I do go into human rights. So I'll ask them what they feel about human rights. And often they'll say, well, humans deserve rights and that's that. And we have the right to eat. And then I'll bring in, have you ever thought of the consequences of what it would be like to work in a slaughterhouse? And oftentimes people will say no, or maybe they knew somebody who worked in one. And then I'll say, well, like my wild card, I guess I could say, like, what if an industry worker told you what it was like, and what if they were, giving you the actual information of what they saw, and they said, these things were really bad for their mental health, and I go into it. And so I don't know how many times I've brought up this human rights part, um, that people will definitely take a step back. Um, Maybe it's because they don't want to look like complete jerks. Maybe it's because they've actually connected with that part of it. It's pretty sad though that they couldn't connect with the animal part of it. But I feel like it's just like, why not just end the conversation on bringing these things up? And even in the religious context, a lot of people bring up halal, a lot of people bring up, God gave us dominion, stuff like that. And I'll talk about, what would you do with your brothers and sisters? Would you want them to work in a place like this? Would you want them to suffer trauma? Can you imagine killing, thousands of animals a day, what that does to you psychologically? And so I often get people just to be like, no, I get it. I get it. So um, obviously I want the focus on the animals. This is why I've struggled with things, because I feel like, it's we want to keep the ball on the animals, because they're the ones obviously like going through what they're going through. So it's hard for me sometimes to try to, bring this up, because I don't know that a lot of advocates, would, or maybe they just don't have the experience on doing street outreach as often. So maybe they might not be clear on, some of the plight of the workers, and some of the situations they're in. So
Hmm. Yeah, so case by case, every conversation is different, of course, and you have to use your instincts and your experience to bear on that. So we have a bunch of questions. I'm going to give you some of those. Oh, okay. So, sorry, I got confused. Hey, David, this is from Nerds Like Us. Of all the places you've visited to advocate for animals, where did you feel the most welcomed and accomplished in your efforts for animal liberation?
wow, that's a great question, nerds like us. Good to see you here. Most accomplished. I mean, a lot of days I wake up and I just don't feel that I'm doing enough, but I think just initially being welcome into the community, when I first started doing advocacy, at first I was scared, obviously, like, oh, you worked in a slaughterhouse. How could you? I've been called a lot of names, but not as much as I thought. I thought I would have way more pushback and way more, uncertainty around me. And I've had quite the opposite, of people have just been so heartwarming and embracing me, and helping me with things. And yeah, like you form all these different relationships. I was trying to think of all the names of people that I have, you know, in person have met. And I just wrote down a whack of names, and my list just kept going and going and going. And, all these people have touched me and inspired me. And it's just been incredible joining a community. That's why I recommend it. And yeah, and then the online advocacy community as well. I think I spent a lot of my down days just listening into live streams and meeting people like nerds like us. And a lot of us feel the same way, or a lot of us, a lot of people in those situations don't feel like they have that community, but then they go online and they have that. Or even on TikTok, there's a whole group there they're doing the same thing. So yeah, that's I guess the best answer that I have. I still feel like there's so much more to give, and but also recognizing like the community's been really awesome.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, we are a community. And I think this next question from Testify Redeem was kind of asking just that. Is there anyone you used to work with actually that is thankful that you're now speaking out? Are you in touch with anybody from where you were?
That's a real
Yeah.
another great question. Yeah. So um there's a few, like, I would call them lurkers. You know how you go into a live stream chat, like probably some people are right now, and they're just kind of like standing back, and they're not, like engaged in the chat, but they're just watching. So I feel like there's a bunch of people there that do. I've had likes on like videos I've shared, and I'm just flashing back to it. Like I've had people that worked in the industry that have come up to me and said, you're right. I've had um like people still follow me that work in slaughterhouses, inspectors, were liking my posts. And even just on this live stream, there was a former inspector who I guess was very, called out a lot of stuff. I think he actually got let go by the same agency. And he kind of jokes about the agency that we worked with, and he gives me the thumbs up and says, "Great for all the stuff you're doing." So I think deep down we all know, everybody knows, and we all know it's wrong. And so it's that conditioning, it's that feeling like, holy crap, I was involved in this, especially working in it. Holy crap, like I gotta admit it now, and that's a lot to take on. And oh no, like what are people gonna think? And yeah, I think it's the doubling down effect. But yeah, I definitely get a lot of praise. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, because I mean, you're an example. You're a role model for folks who are still there, still in there. And you did this 180, which, you'd probably say, I'm no braver than anyone else. I
Mhm.
guess we could argue that, but you left that world. And when you're in the world, drinking the Kool-Aid, which is most of the world, you don't step outside of that. So that's why we're doing our activism. Tenebrae in the chat is asking, um, hold on a second. How does a therapist recommend you bear witness at vigils?
How does? Sorry.
Yeah.
Um, I think they recommended that I go to events as often as I feel comfortable, and um where they think where I've mentioned that, like, I sometimes I can't sleep, I can't do anything if I'm not doing something. So um I think that's why they've pushed me to kind of think about where I might be most effective as far as my own personal health. I've mentioned the bearing witness part, and they asked me a bunch of questions about how it makes me feel, what about it makes me feel a certain way, and then I guess certain triggers if if I've done too much, like if I'm high strung, I guess you could say. I'm kind of just rambling, but with bipolar disorder, I have my times where I'm really on a high, and I often can just go to event after event after event. But when I'm in a low state, she's recommended that uh, I don't do anything. So fortunately for me, I've been in a high state quite often. So
Mm. So, Jeannie says, sorry for the morbid question, but one of your comments made me want to ask. I've been seen in discussions where people argue over whether or not animals cry before slaughter. Have you seen that?
oh yeah, definitely. I've seen many animals cry. You can see the tear ducts. Cows specifically kind of I guess it shows more. Like, well, even when I was in Newark there with you, Michelle, I saw, the tears coming down. Now, can I claim that that's as a result of, their fear? I don't know, but if I see a human cry, cows are mammals. I don't see that much of a distinction from both of them.
Yeah. And Jenny McQueen, who you know, is with us. And shout out Jenny there. David, you're an absolute gift to the animal rights community. Your outreach methods are superb. Thank you for your advocacy. So she wanted to say that.
Oh, Jenny, thank you so much. Speaking of Jenny, I have one of her cards here I was going to bring up. And so I highly recommend everybody have their own card. So You can put on a bunch of documentaries, you can put on a bunch of animal rights groups, you can put on so much information that can help people get involved. So, yeah. Thanks,
Well,
Jenny.
yeah, thanks, Jenny. Is this a good time for you to mention We the Free,
Yes.
or an Animal Save Toronto, or any other
Yeah.
shout out to any other, I guess, Canadian-based sort of groups that most of our US folks who are with us won't maybe have heard of as well.
Yeah, sure. And so We the Free, I'll just show the shirt here. Obviously a global organization. The global launch was in 2021, I believe. Started out with a handful of teams. Now we have, I think it's over 130 or 40 teams globally. I had the honor to meet up with AAM in at the Animal Advocacy Summit recently in Washington, D.C. Panema and crew, amazing people. Got to join them in the Convergence, which was crazy but awesome. So many victories. Mark Jacobs, screw you, Mark Jacobs. I mean, good job that you've changed, but still screw you. And so I got to do a 3-minute movie challenge. I think that's what we're known for. So the idea is to offer a challenge out to people, give them a cookie or a prize if they watch a 3-minute movie. And so we have a children's version, we have an adults version, and people come in and then we talk to them about what they've saw or what they've seen and see if we can come to, an understanding. And also with We the Free, it's community based, so we do things like basically whatever your team wants to do, you can put it out to the team. If you want to do a potluck, if you want to do a movie night, if you want to go for a hike, a run, all sorts of things, and then also the online training part. And if you're still listening and you're not sick of my voice, um, if you're still listening and you haven't attended the IBC workshop, Inspiring Behavior Change, please, please bookmark it, do so. I've taken it like 3 times. It's helped me immensely in learning how to speak with the public. It's free. You don't have to even be a part of We the Free. Just take it with your general day to day. I can't say enough about the organization. Also, yes, definitely work with the Save movement. So a lot of bearing witness. We also did what was called a Safe Square. So again, showcasing what happens in animal agriculture, doing some street outreach. So Save is one of the largest, if not the largest, animal rights organization in the world. So I'd encourage anybody that's looking for a community, obviously AAM, Animal Justice Academy, they'll help out. Also, if you look up animalrightsmap.org, you'll find a map of all the animal rights groups in your area. Hopefully, it's up to date. And yeah, that's just some easy places to get involved with. I think most of our groups are global. We do have the Toronto Anti-Vivisection Alliance, I should give a shout out to. We do, we have a Mercy for Animals. We have Direct Action Everywhere. Jenny McQueen heads that. We have Raccoon Freedom Fighters, Fur Free Toronto, all the above. So, and we work hand in hand with a bunch of groups too. So, and the Plant-Based Treaty as well.
Yeah, that's just a starter list. There are more, and folks are
Yeah.
welcome to, to share those in the chat. Really, we're, such a growing community in that way. So, where do you, David, land on welfarism now? Welfarism versus abolitionism. Should we focus our efforts towards one or the other? Or can we divide our energy a bit or spread out a bit and focus on both? In the meantime, short term, welfarism, while we strive for a slaughter-free world.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good conversation to have. And I don't think we have any like real empirical data that suggests one way is going to win or the other way is going to win. But I'm an abolitionist. Most of my events I do are abolitionist cater to. I think welfare oftentimes is just another excuse, obviously, or in some cases, maybe it could. be a little bit detrimental to us. But on the flip side of that, I can understand why there's groups that do go after these system changes where the idea is to increase cost to consumers, and then making consumers think about it differently. I think, if one takeaway I could give is I don't really critique or go at other animal rights groups often because I don't feel like that's effective for my time. I think leading by example and also doing what I think will work, I think is a much better time spent for myself. I'm worried about people that aren't vegan and changing them and hopefully inspiring them to be active and speaking up for the animals. I don't know if I have time to go over a massive critique of any um, animal rights groups that may tend to sometimes side with welfarism with the goal of achieving animal liberation. So that's sort of where I stand.
Yes, and you have again a unique perspective that others don't have.
Yeah.
So when you were working for the government and as an inspector, did you ever see them make any improvements? Talk about welfarism, even though that's not our end
Yeah.
goal. Did
Yeah.
they ever do anything did you see any improvements while
You
you were?
know, you know, it's this whole thing about, I don't know, like when animal agriculture industry got so industrialized and this idea of humane for, I don't know, 60 years, however, maybe even longer. Um, it's just this big buzzword and euphemism put out there, right? How long does it take to perfect something, right? If you've been doing this for 60 years and you can't perfect it, then what's going on? On the flip side, yes. So I did see change, but it was mostly, if not all, to do with cost and economics. Had nothing to do with considering the animals at heart. Some chickens that used to be, um, put up on a line and stunned, now go into gas chambers. So I don't see how that's helping animals. Um, would crate systems to drop chickens change a little bit? And obviously that does help the chickens not be flapping around and freaking out because they just dropped 12 feet. Um, obviously cage-free chickens would live a much better life than ones that are essentially confined into a little box. Minks as well, and other animals. So these things obviously would help, but yeah, for me, the focus is just on the consumer at the moment. Um, I think if I hit that one, two, influencers maybe type, and they go and they blow up and they start speaking out to maybe millions of people, maybe that'll have a bigger impact than that. And also funding in the movement. I think that's another avenue we can go. But welfare, yeah, I can understand why people would lean towards that, but I also I think I'm like a lot of people. I just
Mm,
yeah, focused on the abolitionist part.
yeah. Yes, but thank goodness we have lots of groups in the space
Yeah.
doing whatever it is that they do. So you have a comment from Being Compassionate who says, "Hi, David. Thank you for all the good work that you are doing. You are a true hero for the animals." Just wanted you to hear that. And Jeannie has a question. Obviously, a huge part of the problem is USDA and Canada's counterpart, policies and their partnership with Big Ag. What do you think is the most effective way to fight this fight?
Yeah, it's a tough one. These industries are so heavily subsidized. It's insane. Here in Canada, we have something called the CDC, the Canadian Dairy Commission, and it's funded, and it's a crown corporation by the Canadian taxpayer. So any money that goes to them, they're advertising dairy. And so that's just one of many grants that are given. There's a whole list of grants that are given to these industries and they don't have to really give much for it. So it's obviously something that's really difficult to tackle. And so is it that we go at the systemic level and we try to break the system? I do kind of like Jake Conroy's approach, where you're looking at pillars, different avenues, different targets that you could do. Um, as far as if I just don't know if we have the capacity. There's not enough activists. There's not enough people that would be willing to become a politician, to become an animal rights activist, or somebody even to be working as a lobbyist in that space. That's why groups like Animal Justice are so important, as they are going against some of the more grotesque laws and stuff like that, and seeing where they can implement change within the system. You see Emma Hurst and uh, down in Australia doing the same thing, but it's difficult. We just we the numbers, the sheer numbers of activists, I don't know if we're up there enough. I wish we were. So I don't have a firm game plan on how you get rid of these subsidies other than making the consumer so disgusted with what's going on and obviously putting a spotlight that they are subsidized.
Yeah. Yeah, if anybody else has any thoughts on that, feel free to share with one another in the chat. And I want to echo that everyone should follow the Cranky Vegan, Jay Conroy, definitely worth a follow as well. And Tenebrae asks, how do you recommend we heal the dissent between abolitionists and welfarists?
That's a really good question.
It is through active listening.
I do, I do like the active listening part. I think however uncomfortable it might make you feel to go in their spaces, whether it's either side, maybe go have a listen. Like I've done events with Mercy for Animals. I've gotten kicked out of places with my comrade uh Jenny McQueen. And so, this was more of what you would call, I guess, a welfare event, but with the goal of increasing prices for eggs, and obviously putting a spotlight on it, and making people aware of what chickens go through. So I think you can have these conversations, but just be open to, maybe going to a convergence campaign, see what that's like, feel that moment, learn about it. Maybe then go to, an animal justice event, go to some of these more what would seem more welfare. I say try them all, see what resonates with you. I don't I have yet to see what works 100%. I think we'd all be on board if we did. So I think a lot of it is going to work, and I think, if you're putting a bunch of different piles down and you're moving them all up, I mean, I feel like at some point maybe one will take the lead, but we're just not there yet. So I can't go and bash one over the other. I'm just going to go with what my strengths are.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So, okay, Testify Redeem has a question. Are there any key takeaways you have from therapy or personal experience that may help others with PTSD surrounding these horrible industries? I mean, self-care, right? You got to do self-care. Get therapy in the first place if you feel that you need it. And Dr. Claire Mann, her book Vistopia and her entire work is about helping vegans in a non-vegan world and activists. So, but any of your own personal thoughts?
Yeah, those are great. And just to carry on with that, I think the one thing that stuck with me with my therapist is obviously the self-care, the grounding, all these things, sleeping, having a proper um, like daily plan. That's big for me. So I have to do the same thing every day. Obviously eating right, getting enough sleep. Maybe I don't do enough of that. And I can probably work on all these things. But one thing that she mentioned to me is that, for all the animals that went through what they went through, we're here right now. Everything's in the past and they're not suffering, they're not going through that anymore.
Mm.
So you don't have to bear the weight of that anymore. It's just you're here today in the moment, and moving forward. You don't have to think about them because they're not suffering anymore. And so that kind of helped me not close the door on obviously what I've seen, but it helped me with a little perspective. Yeah.
Great. That's a really good tip. So I know that you are also about like dismantling euphemisms.
Hmm.
Big part of what you put out there in your content, what you talk about. So talk about that just a bit. Why is it so important to use accurate, truthful languages or and to put that into our outreach? Like it's one, I think that's I try to do that in my outreach sometimes too. At least at the very least, I'm like, at least stop using your euphemisms. And they're like, what's a euphemism? I don't even know what that is. I'm like, well, the word meat is a euphemism. The word beef is a euphemism, So how do you also approach that?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So just keep in mind, like the people are hearing these ideas and thoughts maybe for the first time. So it might sound strange to them. So maybe we just got to keep, maybe a bit of our ego sometimes down and just try to remember when you first went vegan and some of these things are flying out. Like I know speciesism, and maybe I'm not even pronouncing that right. I got a bit of a lisp, but I know I couldn't even say the word, or I couldn't even comprehend what the word was. I was like, what the heck is that? And I kept quiet about it for a while. So imagine coming into the to people and them talking about humane, and you're saying, well, that's more benevolent, and like instead of talking about beef, you're talking about a mother cow, or, so like I think it's important though that we do confront that right when it happens. It might feel uncomfortable at first to say it, just to cut someone off and in there, and we might have a bit of pushback from that. But I think the more you do it, the more comfortable you feel with it, because a lot of people will call them it. And so I've done it too. Like, don't get me wrong, and it's inherent, but we can definitely strive against that. So I think cutting it off right at the beginning when someone initially says it, I think people can regroup and then go back into their conversations. And yes, we put ourselves at an extra distance for using these words like humane, grass-fed, or pork, bacon, whatever these ideas are on calling victims what they are.
Yeah. Yeah. Having awareness where we forget and catching our own species as terms or euphemisms that we've been so, you know, conditioned to use and be an example for that. And then, like you're saying, gently or assertively calling someone out instead of, saying, but what is that really? What is meat or what is beef? It's a body part.
Yeah, and you can definitely
Uh,
dig into that, right? Because if people are starting to think, oh, well, maybe why would they call? Yeah, that is a good point. I've heard that before. That is a good point. Yeah.
yeah. Even like leg of lamb, it's a lamb's leg.
Yeah,
Even just turning it around a bit, drives home what it really is and what it and who it was,
right.
putting a face on that. So I know we're going to wrap up in a few minutes, even though I feel like we have so much more to talk about. But someone asked, when do you turn 41? CDA activism,
Uh,
because I mean, you must get that a lot because you're eternally the 40-year-old vegan. You've forever 40.
so I've had, as you can tell, I probably have had that question. That's probably the longest standing question I've had. In the first stream that I did, I said that I'm actually 73. And you just don't age when you turn vegan. But yeah, I that I who asked that question? Come on. No. Um, I'm to be honest, I think I'm gonna to maybe what some people might not like is I might retire the 40-year-old vegan.
And someone else will
So
grab it then.
yeah, like there's a bit of a lineup. This has been ongoing conversation, negotiations and stuff like that. So I don't want to like, you know, call anybody out and you know.
Well, it's a good time to mention, please go and subscribe to David's YouTube channel and Instagram and all of that good stuff. But I guess as we start to wrap up, then maybe you could say a little bit about how any other tips you have for effective activism, I guess. Any other tips that that you haven't mentioned, and maybe some final words for our viewers, a hopeful message to leave us on.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to thank you, first of all, for having me on and allowing me to kind of, sometimes this is therapy for me to be able to speak about things. And I really appreciate you guys doing all the work you're doing, the podcast, with the live streams, and obviously all the events that are taking place. So I think I mentioned a few, I think it's the cognitive dissonance that we're all facing, whether or not it's with other things going on, but just getting active. I don't see more of a noble cause, that's not human centric because we're always about us, right? Than standing up for these vulnerable beings. Someone said to me, after a vigil, and I don't know if they want me to say their name, but um, you know, after a vigil, we get to go home. We get to put on the TV. We get to spend time with our family. Um, but if that was our like our a mother, our sister, our brother, our father, grandparents, child, we wouldn't leave. We just wouldn't leave. And so, the case is we need to end this and be active and stern on it and have some desire to do it, no matter how uncomfortable it is. Imagine, it was your family member on that truck. Imagine, this is where I was talking about speciesism. It's sometimes we just don't hold the urgency there as much as it's needed. And I'm the same. I'm not calling anybody out or saying whatnot. I'm just trying to inspire. I've been there, seeing it week after week, day after day, and I know a lot of us need to shut it off and self-help and all that. But for the curious person, there's no better cause. There's no better being here. The amount of conversations I have with people in the streets, you're not going to find that anywhere. You go to a workplace, it's artificial most of the time where you have to be cordial and you have to say things along this line and whatnot. And sometimes you don't really know how people feel where this is so intimate. The lens is off. You can literally get in and speak to people about something that we do, all of us do every day is eating and most people are participating in something that's so awful that they might not know about. And so I guess I kind of skipped into the last part first, but um, there's so many things you can do. I was showing these cards. I drop them off. I put them in tip jars, libraries, just hand them out to people in the streets. We all have a variety of talents. Everybody has a talent. I don't care who you are, you have a talent. Dig into that, It doesn't have to be yelling at people on a bullhorn. It doesn't have to be even bearing witness, but it can definitely be something you're talented in. And you can jump people on board with that. There's so many examples of that. So I would encourage everybody, please be active for them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think that message will really land
I hope so.
for all of us, whether we've been doing this a long time or whether we're just started doing it or whether we've never done any fighting for the animals before. We really appreciate the way that you show up so authentically. Um, and we're going to take all of that to heart and take all of that with us. So, thank you, David, so much. Hold on, everyone. We're gonna wrap up with just a few announcements, though. So, um, I want to let you know that for as little as $2 a month, please consider becoming a patron by finding AAM on Patreon. Your donations help AAM to continue to provide free educational resources for activists, which ultimately saves more animals. And one of the best ways to get started, if you're interested, is become a mentor or a mentee, or if you just want to get involved with AAM or to donate, please reach out to us. Okay. And so that wraps up another AAM program. Thank you, David. for your time and wisdom.
Thanks for having
Truly,
me.
truly, truly thank you. This has been such a pleasure. And thank you everyone out there for all your tireless work for the animals. And also we appreciate if you hit subscribe here on our channel and also find David on social media as well. And until next time, stay strong, get active, live vegan, everyone. I'm signing off. Bye, y'all.
Bye.